Hello and welcome back to another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen, an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa, and I present these videos usually every week for a couple of different reasons. The first of which is to take my brain out of the mode of background work throughout the course of the week and move into the process of writing and preparing the sermon that I'll preach to my congregation for the weekend. That's the first. And the second is just to allow you, the viewer, who have graciously given up your time to come by and listen to the random ramblings of this random pastor, to gain some different insight into the assigned text for the week. And if you are a regular subscriber and you tune into these every week, I want to say thank you. Always appreciate your presence here. My apologies for not getting one in last week. I ended up sick as a dog last Friday, and so my sermon prep was very brief and intentional, and I did not take the time for recording a video. But back at it again this week. This particular Sunday, which is September 8th, 2019, the 13th Sunday after Pentecost. Our gospel lesson comes out of Luke chapter 14, verses 25 through 33. First, want to just say happy Rally Day to many, many congregations out there, including my own, as program years kick off, perhaps Sunday school programs and confirmation programs and various other programs depending on your tradition and what goes on within your tradition and congregation. But a lot of that is kicking off, at least here in the U.S., this particular Sunday, now that we are a week past Labor Day. But that being said, let's kind of think about what's happening here. So, as we've been for a while, Jesus is still in the travel narrative, has his face turned towards Jerusalem. We're now approximately halfway through that. It goes on between like chapter 9 to 19, so maybe we're a little over halfway now, but right about that halfway point. Interestingly enough, in terms of our church year, Jesus won't arrive in Jerusalem until April, but interestingly enough, in Luke, at least here in the Revised Common Lectionary, Jesus won't arrive for like 3 more years yet, because we'll switch over to Matthew's gospel here in another couple of months. But I'm going off on weird tangents there, so let's bring it back in, shall we? So Jesus has been doing some kind of, there's been some conflict with Jesus in terms of healing on the Sabbath. We had a couple of stories within the narrative where that happened, one of which we focused on here a couple of weeks ago. And then one that we actually skipped over. Last week, we were talking, or Jesus was talking at a banquet as he was watching the people jockeying for social position within where they sat. And that was kind of the thing that we were talking about. And Jesus talks about public perception. And where I went with that one was kind of talking about what does the host of the banquet say about you? And then I connected that in with Holy Communion. That's just kind of what I did with that particular sermon. Now that is done. There's a little bit of a skip, a very brief one, and now Jesus seems to be back on the road again with crowds following him, and he addresses the crowds. So that's kind of what's happening here. So let's get into it, or read it, and then we'll get into it a little bit more. Now large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and he turned and said to them, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost, to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, This fellow This fellow began to build and was not able to finish. For what king, going out to wage war against another king, will not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? If he cannot, then, while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for the terms of peace. So therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all of your possessions." That's it. Okay, kind of an oddball situation. Now, part of this gospel is also featured in Matthew, the first part, when he talks about the hating of father and mother. Now, Matthew is not quite as detailed and actually kind of softens it a little bit. Matthew does not say unless you hate. Matthew kind of says those who love father and mother more than me. And then Matthew kind of stops it right there. Luke takes it a little bit farther. Some possibilities of that difference there. We consider Matthew had more of a Jewish audience. And so perhaps Matthew's got the fourth commandment in the back of his head as he's writing this or as he's recording this. But we just see that Jesus here in Luke is taking the familial family connection much deeper, saying that you must be willing to separate yourself from your family, even from life itself. And then there's the whole pick up your cross and carry me. Otherwise, you cannot be my disciple. The use of hate is pretty strong language, but we'll hear that again actually coming up shortly. I forget if it's in chapter 15. I don't think so. I think it's maybe another chapter or two beyond that. But when Jesus starts talking about you cannot serve two masters, you will love the one and hate the other. That's definitely the same sense that we have here. But cost of discipleship, that really seems to be the theme here. Now, the two little micro parables that Jesus tells are then unique to Luke. This is the only place where they show up. When he talks about the man building a tower, does he not first sit down and calculate the cost? Or the king going out to war against another king, does he not calculate if with his force, if he's able to defeat the larger force of the other king? And if not, he sends us a delegation for peace. And then Jesus kind of talks about giving up your possessions again, or you cannot be my disciple. So in this brief passage, Jesus says that 3 times, you cannot be my disciple. I wonder if this is a foreshadowing of Peter's threefold denial. Now, Jesus has it aimed at the crowds, not at the disciples. We do hear that. So maybe that's just more of me trying to create a connection that's not necessarily there, but I do think about that. I think about his audience, this mixed bag of people who would desire to follow him, but probably for a variety of reasons, each having their own. That I do think of in terms of Luke's gospel, because when we get to the triumphal entry, which I referenced earlier, when Jesus gets to Jerusalem, there is a sense of what there's 2 different crowds. There's you know what? No, that's not the reference that I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of the road to Emmaus, which is 2 of his followers, 2 of his disciples. We don't know which 2, but that said, we had hoped he would be the one to save Israel. That expectation, and so maybe these potential followers that are in the crowds, maybe that's what Jesus is talking about. You want to be my disciple? You can be. The invitation is there, but it's going to cost you. And how much is it going to cost you? It's going to cost you everything. That really seems to be the theme here of what's it going to cost me. Now, in the lectionary, this is paired up with Deuteronomy 30. This is towards the end of Deuteronomy when Moses is addressing the Israelites shortly before he dies. And he talks about what is to come. You're about to enter into the promised land. I'm not going with you, but you are about to. And God puts before you today this choice: choose life. That's always, I think that one always catches my attention. Choose to serve God. Choose to follow God. Now, are we going to do that perfectly? No, of course not. And that choose life is not present in this call to this cost of discipleship that Jesus is talking about in Luke. And yet, I think that same sense is implied. If you make this choice to follow me, it's going to cost you everything. Now, that being said, I'm going to show my Lutheran roots here. The choice to follow Christ, I get a little nervous when I start talking about that. I have enough Lutheran theology in me, which makes sense as a Lutheran pastor, to say and to think that the choice of faith, I don't think faith is self-generated. I think faith is a gift of the Spirit. We are called by the Spirit through the hearing of the Word. This all comes out of the Small Catechism, Luther's Small Catechism. But so for us I bristle a little bit when I start thinking about the idea that we choose to follow Christ. And yet within our lives of faith, we do make choices of how we follow Christ. And how we respond to it. And what Jesus seems to be saying here is that if you follow this path, if you listen to the call of the Spirit and heed it, and the gift of faith comes in, It's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing, lifelong journey, and it will cost you far more than you could ever imagine, in ways that you could never imagine. That seems to be really what Jesus is saying. And so as I think about this, I'm reminded also of a time when Jesus is talking about the cost of discipleship, and I can't even remember which gospel it's in. I think it's in Luke, but it might be in other spots too. When one of the disciples, I believe it's Peter, says, "Lord, then who can be saved? We have given up everything." And Jesus reminds us there that for humans it's impossible. For God, anything is possible. And I really zero into that because I'm finally thinking about the second to last verse when Jesus is still talking about the king who determines, I can't do this, so I'm going to go sue for peace. I'm going to send a delegation to sue for peace. And what I like about it is this idea that delegation of peace has already been sent, but it's sent by the one who is the stronger force. And that's Jesus. Jesus is the bringer of peace between God and humanity. Now, sometimes that almost feels like a simple Sunday school answer to say that, oh, Jesus came to bring peace. When we also hear from Jesus, I came not to bring peace but a sword. So it's like, what? And I came not to bring peace but division. What? But that is what God has offered us through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. He has brought peace to us in this kingdom of heaven. Now, what's it going to cost us? It's still going to cost us everything. And yet, that delegation has already been sent. And the great reversal that the kingdom of heaven so often brings about for us is realizing that the one who was stronger, who did not need to, has been the one to take those first steps, to make that first effort. That's kind of where I'm going with this sermon, kind of what I'm thinking about in terms of what the sermon will turn into. If you have thoughts, questions, comments, throw them down in the comment section. We'll continue the conversation that way. Otherwise, I hope you have a blessed week. And as always, if you appreciate these videos and would like to support the ministry that allows me to do them because you feel that they are of benefit to you, I will put my congregation's website down in the comment section. You can follow the links and support it financially. No pressure to do that, but if you feel so led, it would be greatly appreciated. Have a great week, everybody.